Hi, I'm Polly McGee, one of your pilot lights.
And I'm Zoe Coyle, the other pilot light.
We're co-pilots, really. Every time I do this thing now, like I'm pointing to her in my mind, maybe she's in a different screen and it's like you're watching something very random and disjointed or listening to. But if you have joined us, welcome. You might have been on this journey with us for a little while now. As you would know then, we are leadership facilitators and general men about town, Mr. Fix-Its when it comes to leadership, courage, emotional intelligence. And we decided that what we would love for ourselves was to have some dialogues about the big concepts that we facilitate in our courses and in our rooms all the time. So that's where we started. It's all got a lot looser and stranger since we began.
No one's wearing pants anymore.
Well, I didn't have them on to start with. But
see, look at you, leader of the pack.
No, I was saying to Zoe that my husband literally stopped me in our hallway today and looked me up and down and went, "Don't stand up when you're videoing, will you?" And I was like, "No, I'm like a newsreader." He's like, "Oh."
I'm actually wearing shoes this afternoon. I thought it might help.
Well, see, Zoe's the one that Zoe's training for this doing stuff on video where you can only see the top half was like, you've got to put your big girl pants on, put proper shoes on. And
I know, it's true.
Like,
I wasn't.
I'm only on one of those things, and it wasn't the shoes and pants. Anyway, we're digressing massively. Welcome. It's lovely to have you with us again. I hope you're enjoying this series as much as we're enjoying it. And really the genesis of this so much came from this sense that we had in our workshops. The people got such great value out of the Q&A. And when we all just talked about what it was for us and unpacked some things, and hence how Pilot Light Unpacked came to be.
It's true. And so one of the questions that we are asked quite a lot is around confidence. And the hilarious idea that the people that we facilitate with always say, well, you're so confident, the two of you, I can't possibly do what you do. So do you want to speak to confidence, Polly? Because I think there are a lot of misapprehensions, and so you go first, darling, for the love of all the gods, go first.
It's less, Zoe, of a question we get, and it's more of an accusation.
Yeah, that's true.
It's really funny. And the first myth to bust here is that standing in front of a group of people and opening your mouth and having words fall out is anything more than a learned behavior. And Zoe and I are both professional facilitators. We're professional speakers. Zoe's a trained actor. I live for the stage of my own life. But both of us have spent a lot of time in public speaking forums, and we're robots now. We've learned how to do it. We've learned how to do the breathing. We've learned how to get up there, and we're confident in what we talk about. But that's very different. So this idea that to be in the presence of a group, you have to have this some sort of supreme being confidence. So I'll give you an insight into this. We were just having a conversation off camera before we came onto the Zoom call about just like, oh God, we had to watch some video editing back last night, and both of us were like, oh, it'd be so great if my face wasn't in it. It'd be so great if my hair wasn't in it. And then we're like, what are we talking about? Oh, confidence. That's right.
Oh, the irony.
There's so much irony. But the point being is that, that we are always in process. So anything that we're talking about with you, it's coming from a place of curiosity and wonder, not a place of mastery. But it's also an idea of what confidence is. And I think in this society, we very much think of confidence as good grooming, being attractive, holding your body in a certain way. And I think for us, what we really think of confidence as is more this idea of grounded confidence. It's not that we're walking down the street, with our periods wearing white pants and like our hair flowing. It's in that kind of idea of what a woman's confidence looks like. Well, I'm really confident because I've got a day-free pad in. It's an overreach of sharing. That's not my story today, not wearing white pants. It is much more that confidence comes from knowing who you are, knowing why you're in the room to start with, if we're talking about being in front of people. And for both of us, it's really about understanding who we're here to serve. We're in a room doing work because we are driven to do this work of facilitating and unpacking around leadership and heart-centeredness and vulnerability and courage and all the things that we think are important in making an amazing society. So I think what comes across as being confidence is also about belief, and it's also about being really grounded in we know what we know what we don't know, And neither of us are in a place where we can be kind of kicked off guard because we're not pretending to be anything that we aren't. I need you to recover this very quickly, Zoe.
Oh no, you're doing absolutely brilliantly. I remember, I don't know, you look so confident saying all of that.
Because I've got a white jumper tied around my shoulders.
Well, that helps. Actually, that's the secret. I remember when I was younger, so a teen, and thinking, oh, confidence is just something that will come with age. And looking at people and thinking it must be like wisdom, where it's something that's earned. And there is a kind of truth in that, but there's also a choice. So moving yourself out of your comfort zone. So for Polly and me, when you use that story before, Paul, about it makes both of us feel uncomfortable watching ourselves back on screen, but it's a necessary evil. And if we were to sit in that discomfort when we're with you now, there would be no joy, there'd be no conversation, there'd just be a crisis of neuroses. So we both choose to do the work, which is we park it. And also, there's the courage, and I do feel proud of both of us in that, because it's the continual turning up. But I think the thing with confidence, the bit that I really particularly loved that you talked about, is confidence isn't about having your attention on yourself. When you know why you're in a room, when you know why you're having a conversation, what you need to share, and if you've done the modicum of work or the amount of work that it requires for you to have that conversation, then it is actually just about turning up. I think confidence is like bluster, that idea of front, of talking bullshit. We all know when people are doing that. And Polly and I have zero interest in that. What we're really interested in is authenticity and authentic communication, which actually does have some sort of bumps in it, and it does have moments where confidence moves through the floorboards and then you bring it back rather than getting lost in that space. So one of the things that's been interesting for me that I've watched in the rooms that we've facilitated, where we have people that come in who really identify that they lack confidence, is if you and I do our jobs well, Polly, and they feel safe in the space and they feel heard, and then they're given a directive to connect with what their curiosity is or what their passion is, then this incredible blossoming happens. And then there's the connection. So I'm always riveted by that. What do you think that people can do to gain more confidence?
I think that's it, Zoe. You really hit the nail on the head. It's authenticity, but it's also connection. Because in connection, we're doing something together. We're not out on our own. So what people will say when we're facilitating, and so we'll come in, we'll be talking. We are talking to you, and we know generally, roughly what we're talking about. But if we say to someone, "Oh, stand up and tell us something," what I see people do is they get really in their heads, and then they get all their symptoms of blushing and breathing, and then they stand up and their hands are shaking, and they say, "I'm so nervous right now." And in that moment of having gone into their I can't, they've lost the whole train of just being able to speak. But they're also imagining that they need to stand in some kind of groomed and sort of an orderly perfection as against what's being asked of them, which is to stand up and say some truth. And no one's judging whether or not they're shaking or whether or not they're blushing or whether they're just listening, because we're generally interested and we want to connect. And this is the point where we first introduce each other, where there's connection. And this is often where we hear that, "Oh, but you're so confident." It's like, well, we're just in connection. So when we begin in a room in connection, as you say, it's nothing about us. That nervousness and self-consciousness comes from a focus on the self. So the key thing that people can do is recognize that they are delivering a truth of some sort at any point. And this conversation comes up around public speaking, because generally we're asking someone to say something in a larger group of people. And so when you are really there to serve others and you're there to connect with others, you're not thinking about how do I look, how's my hair, how's my breathing, how's my stuff. You just open up your mouth and you go. And I think that's the place to get to. But we're also enculturated to believe that we don't have anything worthy to say, that we're not enough. Who would want to listen to me? I'm just taking up space. And, then you can see these narrative threads running through people. And it's often a matter of just, we'll stop people in midstream and kind of go, okay, we need you to breathe. And let's do it all together. And let's just be there and hold space for each other. And that's just kind of, okay, come back into it. And it's, you see people sort of stretching into themselves and stretching into who they are, and that it's okay to be who they are. And we always say to people, we're meeting you where you are, whoever you are when you turn up in the room today, whether you're a nervous mess or whether you've just had a massive fight with your partner or whether you're feeling amazing. You're the person we want to meet today as you are. And I don't think people really realize the power of that, and that the truth of that is that if you just want to sit in the corner and sob your guts out, we'll circle by every few minutes with a tissue and you're okay. It's like that presentation of you is good. So confidence is about turning up as we are and knowing that it's all right to be us, and that we're not pretending. We don't need to pretend.
That's right. Because the pretense, I think, is a tightrope walk, isn't it?
Yeah. But that's the self, because you're really conscious that you can't let it slip. What happens if you let it slip?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the ego too, isn't it? The trying to get it right, trying to be Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. Perfect, whatever that is. So can we talk about authenticity? Because that's something else that we get asked about a lot. And I think it's a really interesting subject, and particularly around inauthenticity, which I think you've just actually encapsulated what inauthenticity is. But I'd love to hear from you a distilled version of that. What do you think authenticity and inauthenticity is, Paul?
I find this quite confronting to talk about, because it's one of those things that I kind of don't believe it's real, in as much as I don't. So let me try and make this as uncomplicated as possible, because my brain's got a knot right now. So when people say, my core values is authenticity, my brain says, how are we ever inauthentic? Because if we can only be who we are in the moment, and we're only able to be present in the present, what we show, the face we show in that moment, is who we are. And we've got a lot of facets. So in this sort of, this should have been in our episode on trigger words, in fact, Zoe, because I think it's often you hear people say, well, like, I really value authenticity. And it's like, well, what do you mean when you say that? So every moment you're striving to be something, therefore you're not in that moment. You're waiting to be authentic. So it's contested for me because I overthink it a fair bit. And what I think we're trying to say is we want to show up as who we are. And what we're really saying is we'd like to show up as the very best version of ourselves, where we're kind and we're connected and we're listening and we're unneurotic and we're not suffering. But the reality is we show up as we are, which is chaotic and scattered and messy and suffering, and however, where things happen. So if I turn up and I'm really shitty, am I being inauthentic? Or am I just being who I am?
That is so fascinating. And I love because what I'm hearing is a very spiritual lens on what you're saying. And that absolutely makes sense. I think for me, authenticity is around truthfulness. And people's truthfulness is deeply personal. And also it moves, it shifts. But it is connected to sincerity. And it's connected to being unmasked. So it's authenticity is the opposite of bravado, and being bigger than, better than. And I talk personally, when I found myself, particularly as a younger woman, when I try and make myself look better than I was. And the deep irony is, of course, you do the exact reverse in that. So authenticity for me, it doesn't require being the best version of yourself. You can be authentically the worst version of yourself, but it is yourself as opposed to someone else, or yourself as opposed to the person that you think that the one that you're in connection with needs to see. That to me is real bravery. I mean, I think, if we talk about your and my relationship as dear friends and as business colleagues as well, you hold very clear space for me to be authentically really shit sometimes, where I will say to you, can you hold space where I rant for a moment and I'm not proud of this thinking, and you'll hold space for that. But it is an authentic part of me. It's not, I wish I didn't have sort of small or petty feelings, and I wish I didn't maraud around in resentment, but that is a part of who I am, and it is an authentic part of who I am. So I think that's an important sort of an important distinction for me, that authenticity doesn't just require being golden.
And my unpacking of this in my mind, and I do it a lot because I think I link it a lot to this idea of how do we be present, and then anything else, future or past, is fiction. So my continual thinking of this is, how do we be something other than exactly what we are at that moment? There is no other space or time for us to be more or less authentic. And I guess I'm getting back into that thing that you and I so often talk about in these videos and podcasts where language is really difficult because people's use of it, they don't appreciate the sort of teleological sense of where it's come from. So I see authenticity so often used as management speak now. You know, what's our main brand? Well, we're really authentic. It's like, well, I don't understand how you can be anything but that. So what does that mean to you when you're constructing it as an idea and as a set of values? So in all of our pieces, in all of our aspects and elements, I feel like we're really authentic. So the striving for authenticity is like the striving for breathing every second. I don't know. It's super complex. I don't have to solve this. It's just
no, you don't. But the curiosity is really wonderful. So for me, it sits quite simply. And thank you for unpacking this with me, because when I come to this point in the conversation, authenticity is about truthfulness for me. Truthfully, who you are in that moment. And I think that comes back to the idea too of the sort of leaders that we want to see in the world in the future, Polly. Those that are brave enough to bring their hearts.
Yeah.
And
to bring their whole selves up.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was about to say.
I think that's truthfulness.
I think they bring the whole self, the integrated self, and to do our own work so that we can turn up for another person without being enmeshed, without being in a transference model, without offloading hurt. I think that that's the goal around authenticity. But then that puts in another sort of spanner in the works, doesn't it? Because I know that when we were talking originally around confidence, when I talk about, say, when we're working and I feel really confident, it's almost not an I in that statement. It's like it's something that happens beyond me, but includes me. I'm sorry to have to keep using the term me in it, because it's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. But confidence arises because I pursue in the room with the other people something really interesting, and my ego is parked for a bit, and I don't experience in the moment. It's something I experience in retrospect, where I go, oh, that's interesting. The neurotic and the ego was quietened there, and I was in connection.
Do you know what though, Zoe? You do experience it in the moment, but it is part of the ineffable. It is part of merging into oneness. This is the best moment of my whole life right now that you just said that. It's made me so incredibly happy, because this idea that when we are able to move through the idea of the separate and idealized self into true connection and true communion with people, there is no I and there are no borders, and they come back in when we engage our minds. So when you're talking about your work, and you know, one of the great things about how you work is it's very emotional and it's very wholehearted and it is very connected, and it is fully in, you're present in rooms. And I think that's why you're such a great facilitator and people have such transformation with you. So when you can't possibly realize you're doing it when you're doing it, because when you're doing it, there is no you to realize. This is like the conversations you have in monasteries and in Buddhist temples, where like the pursuit of the no you and the nothing is the something you're pursuing. It's so circular, but
so
you can't recognize you when there is no you.
And I think that this comes back to, sorry, did I just interrupt your train of thought?
No, there's no train of thought, because these concepts are so enormous, and I've just been thinking about this for such a long time. And so I love it, because we don't often understand how often we have these moments of true enlightenment. If enlightenment is anything, it is that we can't experience it, because if we experience it, there's still an us.
Yes, I completely agree.
People are sticking pins in their eyes right now hearing this. Sorry.
Oh, you go. Have a gin and tonic,
I can see them at home going, "Oh, stop it! It's about to explode."
So true. But it does circle back. I want to circle back to when we were talking. We started this video earlier, and we were talking about the pain of watching ourselves, and that's interesting. That return to the I, because when you and I are in flow, when we're doing this in flow, we're beyond ourselves. We're not trying to be know-it-alls. We're not trying to be whatever. And it's beautiful and it's alive. But then the going back and watching of the thing robs it, denudes it of that in a way. I mean, not hopefully not for you, dear listener, dear reader, but for us, it's that crisis. And I guess that's the other part of confidence, isn't it? Where you go, okay, well, I'm going to compartmentalize that and I'm going to keep going. There's going to be another video. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do it again. And that white noise, that hot shame of overexposure and feeling like a fucking fraud or an idiot. I just theoretically is part.
But sorry, like just to keep you in this place of discomfort, which is, I know, your favorite position.
I do. I love it.
it's this, the thing with this is, and I was having a beautiful conversation with a very dear friend of mine today while we've been making videos, and you and I have been talking about shame and vulnerability and all the things we love to talk about. And, you know, he was having a similar conversation. And what sort of struck me was that when we do this thing where we are in the critical voice, we don't ever question that. And I was saying to him, you know, what about just for a minute you stop and go, mister, can you show me the facts? What are the facts of this? So if I'm looking at myself and I'm kind of doing the classic, you know, with me, it's like the voice of my mother, of you haven't done a lot of exercise in the last 10 weeks, have you? You know, or that sort of stuff, where I'm looking at the very superficial stuff. I'm missing the whole. I'm only seeing this one kind of thing. And it's like the voice we need to kick in and the neural pathways we need to build are like, actually, you shut up for a second. I'm watching this and this is important to me because I'm doing this for a thing. You know, it's like we just instantly trust that the negative voice is the dominant voice rather than saying, piss off, dude. Heard you before. And then suddenly it's just neutralized and it's kind of diminished and you get on with it. And I think the point I was trying to make before I went off into that long rambly diatribe was that, but I think the thing is you don't stay in this. You, we, I, we don't stay in that, because if we did, we'd never leave the house. And for most people, it's like you have the moment where that voice pops up. That's the voice of trauma. That's the voice of wounding. But it's not the only voice. And what I'd like to cultivate much more in that internal narrative garden is the voice that goes, holy shit, you're on fire. Look at you doing all this stuff. And, you know, this is fun, big work. And I'm glad you're enjoying it so much. Because that's the actual other voice. But we don't give oxygen to that voice.
I completely agree. I love that idea of where you place your attention is what grows.
Yeah.
And we talk about that in the rooms that we facilitate in. Be careful where you place your attention and what voice you deign to be your king or your master. And I think it goes back, and we've talked about this in previous videos, but I think what I had to remind myself earlier after watching the videos was, oh, this is where self-compassion comes in. Like, you can either get on this train and go down this shame storm and collapse and have a bath with your ego while it flagellates you with thistles, or indeed barbed wire. See, I'm really enjoying that image there.
Christ, there's a lot of spiky things happening.
It was really so spiky. Or you practice self-compassion. And I'm a huge fan of, and bear with me, people, I'm a huge fan of putting my hand on my heart. And we do this in facilitation rooms. It's so beautiful to see, say, a 60-year-old mining dude, and Polly's been talking about her beautiful spiritual insights, and the room is sort of gone. And then I'll go, and what we should do now is have a feedback loop. Put your hand on your heart and shut your eyes. But what's so gorgeous is that almost 100% of the time they clamber over the top of their cynicism, and their cynicism is a way of staying separate. You know, and they feel it's staying
safe because they're frightened.
Yeah, that's right, to stay safe. And they clamber over top of that. And it's always so moving, isn't it, Polly? This moment when someone comes back to themselves, comes back inside, and the energy in the room, really, it starts to shimmer, and everybody is softer. There's a softness, but there's also a strength, and there's a focus, and this kindness happens. And even just talking about it makes the hair on my arm stand up. And I'm going to use the word as grace. There's a grace.
Yeah, it's a total grace. And, you know, it's funny, but also beautiful and normal and layered, that this friend who was having the conversation with, who's a very dear friend of mine, we've been buddies 20 years or more. And he's, as we were having this, and we're very similar, so as we're having this conversation about the exterior voice, and he said to me, you know, I used to put my hand on my heart for 2 hours a day. I used to sit and be in an energetic space of loving awareness. And he's, like, no surprise, he's a therapist. So he's, you know, he's working all day with people who are in crisis. And like, you know, I just said to him, dude, like, you gotta turn therapist brain down, because the therapist brain is just in the talk all the time. And then we're all there. We're all talking all the time. The minute we somatically soothe ourselves, and Zoe, you talk beautifully about self-soothing and holding your heart. And remember when someone said that to me, I just thought, you are the biggest tool ever. This is years ago, like, oh, I just got to hold my heart. And I'm like, what kind of language is this? And, you know, of course, irony on irony. But the very act of bringing us back to that central part of our body where the greatest brain in our body exists it's like you say, someone turns a dimmer in the room down and all the bright, harsh, strobing light of criticism, cynicism, comparison, suddenly when your eyes are closed and you're in a room together of humans without identity, without separate selves, just holding their hearts, that's the point where we start to feel what it is to really, truly be in connection. And it's such a valuable thing sometimes just to shut your eyes and to shut out the stimulus and the stories just for a minute.
And one of the other things that we found really interesting in our facilitation is how trapped most of us are by our thinking, by our brains. And so we get people up a lot and up and moving, and you can see in the beginning of the day, they're like, oh my God, am I going to have to? And then at the end, of course, in the feedback, that's the thing that they love the most, being up and moving, identifying their feelings, coming back into their bodies, playing. We talk a lot about playing, don't we? And when was the last time you played, oh beloved listener? And I hope it was today. Polly and I, you probably picked up, we're really big believers in play as joyous union and connection. And obviously it affects your serotonin levels. So there's research to back this up. We haven't just plucked these ideas out of the ether.
We have zero original thoughts, Zoe. Everything we do is basically, there's some research on that.
I feel like I have some original thoughts about Dachshunds, but I don't mean to make myself special. Okay, so we've covered a lot there. We've covered a lot. We started talking about confidence, and then we talked about authenticity. We talked about how can you move towards that and what is it to be truthful. We've talked about the experience of coming back to body, of recognizing emotion, what it is to be in connection and truth.
The self-compassionate voice, such an important thing is to remember to speak to ourselves like we're children or pets that we love. And to, we would never scold or criticize or throw barbs at a child or a puppy that was standing in front of us in pain and crying and hurt. We would bring them in and would say, I'm with you, and this is hurting for you, and I'm with you. And we don't do that with ourselves enough, and I'm a massive criminal against this. But it's really interesting to think of that, like bringing in us parts of ourselves into a gentle integration.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And the hope that we have from all the research is that we can burn new neural pathways and we can choose new behaviors. And so the question is, how do you want to stay and who do you want to be? And it's not that you're not enough now, but it's how much agony do you want to live with? And there is some control around that. And we know that from the research around gratitude and neural pathways.
So we talk about that research because my memory of when you were teaching that neural pathway work with it's something like 21 days. You can go from being like a rusted on pessimist, cynicist into being someone who is really embracing joy and hope. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. But it requires a doing. It's not just a decision. It's a doing. It's a practice.
So it's a practice.
It's a practice, and that practice is it is burning new neural pathways. So moving from pessimism to optimism, and we've spoken about this before. Not ridiculous optimism. We're talking about realistic optimism, but to move from that space, and it's to do with gratitude. So making sure that you have a practice of gratitude, which is writing it down. And the writing it down is the thing because it moves it for a different part of your brain and it works it out through your hands. So Sean Aker is the specialist in this. I absolutely love this dude. And if you want an introduction to him, there's a beautiful episode with him on Super Soul Sunday with Oprah, where he just rabbits at 1,000,000 miles an hour about his research. But yeah, it's the gratitude, it's play as a component of that, and mindfulness. And it's 21 days, and you write it down 21 days, and all the research, you look into his work and he will give that to you. I mean, I would love to talk to you all about it. There's a marked shift in the level of happiness in your life. And he defines that very specifically in a way that I love. But the other thing about Sean that I want to talk about with the mirror neurons is he has proven through his research that joy and happiness is so wonderful. It doesn't matter if it's yours. That if I'm in an MRI machine and I am smiling joyfully at something, a part of my brain ignites, and it is the exact same part that ignites when I see a photograph of you smiling. And you know, that blows my mind, this idea of the neural network that we all share, that your joy is my joy, your misery is my misery. So to walk around with a face like thunder, being a misery guts and being abusive, you're promulgating that out into the world. And you know, I mean, I find that really deeply exciting, that your spiritualists have been telling us this for years, and now science is finally getting on board and saying, okay, if you stand in an airport lounge waiting to get onto a plane, and you put an actor in that space who's going to look at their watch and demonstrate the behaviors of anxiety, if there are 12 people in that space, the majority of them, within a few minutes, that behavior, that energy is contagious. And it's true, one of the exercises Polly and I love to do in a room is where we get people to look each other in the face. And well, the eye contact stuff is always so gorgeous. But this specific exercise is a Sean exercise too, where you get one person, person A, to be absolutely blank-faced, and the other just to smile their heads off. And that experience of trying to hold your face still when somebody is just smiling at you lovingly and joyfully. And when we call time on that, the rooms just erupt, don't they, Polly? Everyone's just so full of love and joy and presence. And then the other thing comes up, which is every time people say, gosh, I don't remember the last time I really looked someone in the face. And I don't remember the last time I allowed someone to look me in the face. And then that opens up beautiful, rich conversation around, isn't it interesting that we try and hide in plain sight? And the very thing we want, to be in connection and feel seen and feel met, is what we make unavailable. Because, well, I ask you, why do you think we do this? And it's deeply personal, of course, but what we hear in the rooms that we're in is because people don't want to feel found out. That feeling of vulnerability feels terrifying for them, but actually it's the very thing they crave.
So here it is, an invitation for listeners and viewers to walk around with a smile, look at people in the eye, just give yourself a test and see what happens, and see how people's bodies change, and see how you feel, and see how that feeling changes. We're going to leave you with that test. I am Polly McGee, my beautiful co-pilot Zoe Coyle and I
love
will see you.
Yeah, we'll see you next time, people. Thanks so much for staying with us. And if you want to speak to us or send us a question or fan mail for Polly, come to our website, pilotlight.co.
We love having questions sent to us. This is the thing. So if any of this has sparked something for you, it's like, dear Zoe and Polly, imagine we're an agony aunt channel. Send us the question and we will answer it.
Yeah.
Pilot Light Unpacks. Until next time, thank you, friends.
Goodbye, dear ones. Bye-bye.